Well, welcome everyone. I really appreciate the great turnout. I think we're at 250 people from 25 states. I think that says quite a bit for this location. So the Reproduction Task Force was started some 20 years ago, probably. The first meeting was in Manhattan, Kansas. The second meeting was in North Platte, Nebraska. And we may still hold the record for the greatest attendance. We had it across the road in a hotel. Of strapped for places to hold an event like this, but thank you all for turning up. We had a great pre-event yesterday at TD Angus. Many of you were there. We had a seed stock panel. Troy Smith will let you read about it in his journal entries across the beef industry. Then they got to go to sustainable beef. So the newest packing plant in the United States is here in North Platte, Nebraska. They're gonna, when they get to capacity, process about 1,500 head. I'm located here just south, not a couple miles away, at the West Central Research and Extension Center, which is part of our vast presence in the state of Nebraska. We're at the confluence of the North and South Platte rivers that form the Platte River that then flows into our eastern border, which is the Missouri River. We have more miles of river in this state than any state in the United States. I wasn't aware of that till the great floods of a few years ago. Most irrigated state, largest feedlot state, largest packing capacity. Our biggest feedlot that we send all our cattle to is at Lexington, Nebraska. They kill 4,000 head a day. They're building a feedlot that is about 2/3 full, or down here or over here to the western part of Nebraska, called Black Shirt Feeders. It will be 200,000 head capacity, which to my knowledge is going to be the largest feedlot in the United States. We feed over half the cattle within 100 miles of where you're sitting now. If you're interested, drive south about 12 miles to North Platte Feeders, you'll see a feedlot that's 88,000 head. We have a lot of ethanol. We're not number one, but of any state, we don't export much distillers grains. So this is a competitive advantage in feeding. Our largest ranch in the university system, I didn't see Jerry Keneally here, but you know Keneally Angus. You probably don't know the Goodmanson Ranch, but we're just a little bit north of there. It's about 13,000 acres, about 700 head of females that are Red Angus Simmental. We finish all those cattle here just south of you, about 3 miles. There's the ranch. It's a great resource for our university. We educate a lot of graduate students. We have a dorm facility there. The Wolf family, Jay Wolf, helped build that Wagenhammer Center. So it's probably the largest event center in the Sandhills. So a lot of the research in history and before I got here was to look at how can we decrease input costs of beef production. Don Adams was very instrumental. Don Clanton, who's a South Dakota native, but they looked at, what about feed? How can we decrease the #1 cost in beef production? And a lot of that focused on year-round grazing. The other one that I have quite a bit of information I'm going to share with you today is we don't think about, but cow depreciation is the second largest expense to the beef enterprise. And these components are something that my research and extension program really focuses on. You can't do a lot with purchase price, but you can with replacement cost, right? So we've done a lot of work with low input heifer development. And then how do we keep that cow in the herd longer? And that was a big focus of our panel yesterday. And then again, the productive years in the herd. So what if we were able to decrease that replacement rate? We'd have older cows, and they told us yesterday that those older cows are the ones that are proven, right? Tend to wean heavier calves, and they're easier to breed back to a point. Number one is reproduction, though. If I don't have a live calf, I don't have anything else to worry about. I don't care about that magnificent yield grade 1 prime animal that they cloned down in Texas, do I? Our animal breeders, Matt Spangler will be back tomorrow, but they agreed. By simply increasing number of progeny per dam through either selection, heterosis from crossing, or better management will increase the efficiency of production. Number one. We've done some retrospective analysis of a lot of records throughout the years. Those heifers, their first time that calve early, they wean a heavier calf, they breed back better, and they have, like I said, a heavier calf. There's more cycling at the beginning. This event, and Bob Cushman isn't here this year, but this event of when animals breed their very first time sets them up for their entire life. And you're going to see a lot of this. One of the biggest accomplishments of this task force was to standardize the protocols of synchronization. So every catalog that you see has the same recommendations for synchronization protocols. There's a couple being debated today, but we can front load that breeding season. George Perry's going to give a talk on using synchronization with natural service. I don't know why we don't do more of that. We do, every animal at Goodmanson is synchronized, and very few straws of semen go in that animal. But for heifers, I prefer the longer progestin protocols, MGA, prostaglandin, or 14-day cedar. Doug O'Hare is here somewhere. He said he's always striving for better as one of the biggest heifer development facilities south of Ainsworth, Nebraska. He said, what about this 14-day cedar? I said, well, you get MGA in your cattle, don't you? He said, yeah, but I hear great things. We did a study, and it's published, with over 1,400 heifers, and those two protocols come within 1%. So if you can get MGA into cattle, it's a lot less expensive. And in anything that's had a calf, I would argue it's hard to beat the 7-day cedar. Get the question, well, if you AI, you need just many cleanup bulls. Well, that is not true. And the data is out there. You need about half. And with synchronization with natural service, you don't need any more bulls either. Because those cattle, if they're bred on the same day, they don't all calve on the same day, and they don't return to estrus on the same day, do they? So a lot of the things I talk about are after the fact. My calls come in the fall, and sadly they should come in the spring before the mistakes are made. But what are the problems? Cattle are not good candidates for estrus. I was down in Joplin, Missouri, and gave a similar talk to this and said these high-risk females are probably the animals that are best candidates for a synchronization program. And I had a producer come up to me afterwards who was going to go fire his vet. He said, they will not let me synchronize anything that's not 60 days postpartum and a condition score 5 or better. I said, they're already cycling. We got great tools to help animals that aren't cycling to cycle. You got to give the right shots at the right time. I don't know when, what spring I'm ever going to get past that didn't make a mistake of giving prostaglandin or GnRH at the wrong time. Sire selection, this is a lingering problem over time. If we select for more output, we got to have more input. And I'm not against that, but Jay Wolf, again, I mentioned his name, he tells me my weaning weights haven't changed in 40 years. I said, you haven't allowed them to change. Those 40 pair that you have on a section of ground are not the same 40 pair you had 20 years ago. Semen handling, Brad Stroud has some great information on that. Facilities, stress. We tend to think of all the things we do prior to breeding affects reproduction, but what about after breeding? I think that event, and including shipping, has a huge effect. And then what do animals do? I think $3 corn's the worst thing ever happened to a heifer, because we got them in the feedlot, we got to get them gaining a lot to overcome the yardage charges. And if they're over 2.5, 3 pounds a day, they will not do that on grass. And if we get them pregnant, which we didn't know, and they go backwards in that first 30 days, we're going to lose embryos. And then we can debate this. I don't know if anybody's going to bring this up, but the synchronization products that are approved all work. So I guess it's whoever you got a good relationship with. I'm not so worried about stress around breeding. How can you stress an animal more? Unless you perhaps have an event like this. This was on the Sunlight Ranch in northern Montana. This heifer jumped out twice. I lobbied to shoot the semen somewhere near her. And the ranch said, no, we need this great genetics in our herd. Everybody wrote her number down and who was pregnant in the fall. This is a guy at grad school in Montana. There is some data on shipping. I tell people you either ship them right away or you got to wait probably at least 40 to 45 days. Those animals that become pregnant, the chance that they're going to be pregnant the next year, if they become pregnant in their first cycle, is much greater. Harlan Hughes, who many of you probably read about in Beef Magazine, he was on faculty when I was at NDSU as an undergrad. He said it takes a profit from 2 early calving cows to cover the loss of 1 late calver. And a cow that calves in her first cycle her whole life will give you 2 more calves in her lifetime. You tell me a trait that's worth more than that. It's not any carcass trait we measure. It is truly fertility. Well, where's it start? Is it how long we leave this bull in? Mike Smith is here. This is his data from Missouri. He says up to a point, it don't matter how long that bull's around. It does not matter. There's something else that are putting a cap on our reproductive rate. We have had a 45-day breeding season at the Goodmanson Ranch since I started here, and we hover above or in the middle of 90%. What do you do with your bulls when they're not breeding cows? They're a pain in the butt, right? My guys are so happy that we sold, Haley's here somewhere, sold 2 couples. They don't have to go across the road every day to chop ice. Well, I tell people, and this happened at the ranch, our manager, he was expressing concern over managing another group of animals. I said, turn them bulls back with the bred cows. And I know a lot of you have done that. That totally changes their behavior. It's amazing. And what does it hurt? Tom Brink, who's now CEO of Red Angus, we're in a similar point in history that we're at the lowest cow numbers ever, and are we going to rebuild the cow herd? We did a series of meetings across the United States looking at what are the opportunities. I mean, a $4,000 heifer today, somebody told me bred heifers bringing $5,000. So what's the question? Do I buy or raise my own? And a lot of the economists have debated this and largely said it's a kind of a wash. But the one thing that's never been included in this evaluation or analysis is the opportunity to go to a terminal sire system. We waste so much on using heifer bulls. Over 85% of the genetic decisions in the cow herd are made for a 15% replacement rate. I think a lot more cattle ought to be terminal. So I have done a lot of work with heifer development. We're waiting for the corn to ripen so we can get to the cheapest feed resource that we have available in Nebraska, which is corn residue, which isn't any good anymore, right? That BT corn is no good. Well, don't tell the research that. Those cattle, provided its appropriate stocking rate, will gain a lot better on corn residue with no supplementation than grazing winter range. That's outside my front steps. There is a lot of forage dry matter in that field. Jim Gosey, who's a famous animal breeder from Nebraska, he gave a set of criteria for replacement heifer selection. He said, get rid of bad marked cows, those that need help nursing that calve late, that failed to wean a calf, that wean a light calf, and have attitude problems. Beyond that, he said, get rid of the lightweights, big birth and big frame, get rid of the youngest born, or call the youngest that were born after 45 days, the youngest calves. Select daughters, the oldest cows. How many agree with that? The animal breeders don't. But Jim Gosey said, that cow that's weaned you 8 calves in the first cycle her entire life has shown that she can exist in your environment that you're going to give her. So, and then some other functional things. We need cows that can eat. We need cows that can live on corn residue, that need minimal supplementation. So a lot of our heifer development work is focused on that. We've developed heifers on wintergrass, corn residue, dry lot on different rates of gain, and we've seen that these open heifers, if you're ever going to have a female that's going to be profitable, it's going to be one that never got pregnant ever. If she gets pregnant, somebody asked me this yesterday, what do you think about using seeders to move cattle up or getting them pregnant? I said, you're obligated. If you made the mistake of getting her pregnant her first time, you're obligated that she needs all the assistance you can give her to get through the rough years, the 2 and 3 year olds. That might be one of the reasons we don't practice low heifer development systems. How many like those heifers? How about those? They're the same heifers after they got back from a winter in North Dakota. A lot of the work focused on target weight and said you got to have heifers at 2/3 of mature weight or they won't breed or they'll have calving difficulty. Those data are some probably approaching 50 years later. I would argue a heifer never has to gain over 1.5 pounds a day to get to some target weight that you're comfortable with that probably exceeds where she needs to be at. Because we're weaning 5-weight heifers. If we're breeding 750-pound heifers, which might be light for you, but is greater than they're needed by all our research, they don't need to gain more than 1.5 pounds a day. A lot of work is focused on how you get there, the low, high, and then low to high rate of gain. Finding that first service conception rate of moving a heifer in a low rate of gain to a higher going into breeding, they breed better. And there's more in the herd at 5 years of age. If you put them or expose them to the environment that they're expected to develop or to breed on later in life. This is some of Bob Cushman and George Perry's data is in here too. You're going to hear him today, showing that when a heifer conceives her first time, greatly influences her longevity and how many pounds a calf she weans by her 6th calf. They'll give you another calf by her 4th or 5th calf because of weaning weight. So some of the work on the left was on corn residue, having cattle, 6-weight heifer. How many are comfortable breeding that? Well, guess what? Look how much more or a higher conception rate we had. Why is that? I mentioned this earlier, but heifers on corn stalks gaining less than 1 pound a day in the dry lot, 1.5 pounds. We then synchronized AI them together, turned them out 50 days later, brought them in, ultrasounded them. Those heifers that were on corn residue gained 1 pound a day greater grazing side by side. And I have at least 20 years of data to substantiate that. That compensatory gain, or part of its behavior, isn't it? Because they were developed on a system that later they were going to be expected to perform on. I know the Maddox Ranch crews here, and this is, I don't know if this is loved or hated or they're still doing it, but we late wean our later calving cows. And John started this. And there's 750 maternalizers, 5-way red cross. Calves are on them till Robert, a month before they calve again. And we have done some of this, and that those calves, and we're looking more this year, started a new project. Those calves left on the cow, they perform better as a first calver being exposed to that. The calf learns from the cow, and we don't know how to study it, but it's real, and I think a lot of you would agree. So we talk about, and I'll take a lot of information away. George will probably present this, but we do this to every animal on the Goodmanson Ranch. Turn the bulls in, 5 days later, they get a shot of prostaglandin. Well, I don't want to bring them in. Well, then don't. A heifer, and this is only approved in heifers, feed them MGA for 14 days, and then wait about at least 10 days, turn the bulls in, no shots. And we have increased, the time of, or decreased the time of conception, increased the age of calf, increased weaning weights with these two systems that are very simple. We went from a 60 to 45 day breeding season in 1 year, and did we hurt conception rates? With synchronization, we did not. And it increased value by, today it's probably $100 a head. Harlan Hughes said opportunities for increasing profits lie in moving these late calver problem cows up. Can we do that? Again, Mike Smith's data. This is 2,300 and some first calf heifers that half of them were cycling, half of them weren't. Synchronized, AI bred, which had the highest pregnancy rates. How do you get a non-cycling animal pregnant? Zoetis is not paying me to stand here today, but this is really the only product we have. I moved a cow up 56 days in 1 year with that device right there. That is labeled for a 20-day postpartum utilization. Is it worth $15? How many pounds a day do we get out of a conception? At least 2, right? What that 56 days do? 100 pounds a gain for $15? I'll probably take that bet any day. There are other products. People tell me the cedar's off patent, but I haven't seen this in the US. I saw it in Down Under in Australia. So why do we see this variability? One of our regional reproduction groups, with many of the people you're going to hear talk, do multi-state research. And this was a project, and this was the noise they saw across the United States and all the same protocols. Well, this is the problem. And we have not made much advancement over, at least my career. Fertilization rate in most mammals is really high, approaching 90%, but we lose 30 to 40% of the embryos before day 40. Why? A lot of the things that I talked about, and I'm going to continue to talk about. What about carcass traits? How has that affected fertility? Is it? Angus says it isn't. I don't know. I think we select for animals that are real high performance, that don't put on any fat, probably aren't our ideal females, but they're ideal in a feedlot. So there's a dichotomy there. But we got to admit this. The genetic contribution of any one female on a commercial operation is maybe not zero, but it's close. This is where we make the progress or non-progress is in the sire selection, right? Reproductive traits, I wish we had better markers. I wish we had a genetic test to talk about fertility. The talk yesterday, these seed stock guys all put in animals. They want an EPD for the recip. They said that is the most important thing and one of the biggest missing pieces that they have as a seed stock person. We tend to select for traits that decrease negative effects on reproduction. A cow or a heifer that doesn't have dystocia or calving problems breeds back better. When we pull a calf, Bob Bellows at Miles City said, if she's having problems, get rid of it. Get rid of the problem. If we assist those animals sooner than later, they'll breed back better. Scrotal. We look at a bull sale catalog, we got all these numbers and we think bigger the better. Is it? how much of this contributes to heifers getting pregnant on a cow? That scrotal circumference is related to age of puberty in the females, isn't it? Milk, both milk and growth, mature size, can have a negative effect in the limited resource environment which we are in. And I said, I don't care about selecting for increased productivity, but you better allow for it to occur, or reproduction is going to be the first thing to falter. This is the EPD for yearling weight. See that black line? Is that the same cow back in whatever the early years was as it is today? I saw, one of the famous Mark people in Houston, Texas, gave a talk, and it kind of shuddered. It was at BIF, kind of shuddered the room that he said the epitome of a terminal animal today is Angus. How many agree? I mean, look at the EPD for yearling weight. They're above or beyond or equal to any of the continental breeds. If a producer was using Angus bulls with average EPDs for milk, weaning, and yearling, the same bulls from 98 to 2000, the same bulls would be ranked in the bottom 5%. We can make change. There is no doubt, but there are consequences with too much. And feed efficiency, I don't know how RFI or RADG relates to my cow or heifer grazing corn stalks when it's measured on a confined animal on a high megacalorie ration. Larry Cora, who many of you have heard, some of you haven't, don't even know the name, K-State, CAD guru. He said, as we strive to improve growth rate in the cattle industry to make the commercial cow more efficient, we need not forget about reproductive efficiency. That is still number one. You know, why do we quit this? It ain't a free lunch, but it's darn near free. We can increase weaning weights without increasing the factory requirement. And we've looked at, alternative measures to decrease input costs with time of calving. People calve when they do for two reasons: facilities and labor. I know there's at least one person from the Rex Ranch, and they're tasked with the event of calving 900 heifers with no facilities. They were in a March calving system when I moved to Nebraska, and Chip Ramsey was slowly moving it to a later May calving system. And one year he said, I'm going to May for everything. I said, why? He said, you know how many May calving calves I lost in that March blizzard? Yeah, pretty disheartening. There are consequences. Nutrient availability is declining as we breed later and later in the breeding season. I'd rather breed a thin cow gaining weight than a fat cow going the other way. I'll take that bet any day. Well, what about all these other traits we're said are important for our consumer? And we cannot forget about our consumer, but we cannot forget about fertility in our cow herd if it's going to affect traits. I was on a bus going to Lethbridge, Canada one time, and this producer was telling me about how much emphasis he put on carcass traits, primarily marbling. I said, when do you sell your calves? He said, I sell them off the cow. He didn't talk to me again. Which is, we have a unique system, which is highly not integrated, right? Future beef don't exist no more, right? Many of you don't know who Future Beef was. Ronnie Green rode the ship down. But we want a cow to exist on nothing, to produce a calf on nothing, that we then put in a feedlot and give it all it can eat, cut all its identification out when it gets to North Platte feeders, and expect it not to be a Yo grade 4 when we knock it in the head. Any challenges in genetic selection in our industry? Animals got to fit the environment. We've got to have a live calf born every year. That might be the free lunch there. Crossbreeding. Some of that was brought up yesterday. I'm sure Spangler and Weber will hit on this. Patsy Houghton down here at Heartland, when she was developing heifers, she said those crossbred females are more fertile. And they're not having to go out and forage. They're getting fed every day. Too much can be a problem. We're getting into all these cover crops and irrigated grasses and things. Too much protein, some of the older data, and some will argue it's not a problem breeding on rye or turnips or whatever, but I've run into it. Is there a cure-all? We thought fat was the cure. If you're going to buy a supplement, it better be for the protein and energy, not some miracle by something in it. And all fat is not created equal. And those fat sources have different fatty acids, which ultimately affect hormones, which affect reproduction, obviously. Minerals, some of you are from states that have a lot of oil, and that's good. But if you have sulfates because of it in your water, or high levels of some antagonists, we better be feeding, and I'm going to get free meal, I think. We better have some trace mineral sources are highly bioavailable, like Zinpro. We have done some work with them. We don't have a lot of antagonists in Nebraska. We tend to have good water. If I'm going to feed a supplement, I want an ionophore in it. Rumensin, Bovatec, due to, it increases efficiency, but there are some, and Dave Lallman's here, he wrote a really nice review on the effects of rumensin on fertility in both heifers and cows. And overall, it tends to help. But this is what we're dealing with embryonic loss. There are genetic defects. 99% we will never find. Why? Because it ends up in embryonic death. Environment, some things I talked about, nutrition, some miscellaneous things. They got to put dairy cows back on some level of progesterone to get them to breed because of the high metabolic turnover of progesterone in those animals. I hope that don't happen in beef cattle, but our milk EPD is not stabilizing or going down. So to finish up, some really neat work that was found, I guess I would say by accident. But looking at a systems approach, I was told back in college that the body condition of a cow at calving was the biggest indicator when she'll breed back. To point, that is true. And again, I showed this before. Feed is the biggest cost of beef production. So Don Adams and others asked, how can I decrease this cost? What if we graze year-round? And what are the consequences of grazing year-round in an environment that doesn't meet an animal's requirements? When we're grazing dormant forage, it will not meet animal requirements. And this wasn't even thought about. This was at a point when a lot of fetal growth is occurring. So the question was, do I need to supplement on this environment when it's not meeting requirements? And largely those animals not supplemented were thinner at calving. Then which do you think bred better? Same. Why? Because those cattle at calving, they caught up by the time of breeding. No difference in pregnancy rates. So why supplement? I've been accused of selling a lot of feed for companies showing this slide. It's not the point. The point is, those cattle supplemented on range had the same pregnancy rate as non-supplemented, or did not. They were slightly lower, but not a lot. On corn stalks, it did not even pay to supplement. But guess what? When you look at the calf, those heifer calves born to cows that were not supplemented were less fertile. The steer calves were what? 70 pounds lighter at slaughter due to something that happened before they were even born. Quality grade was lower. We affected marbling. I was speaking at Dawson County Cattlemen one day, and John Schrader and Craig Uden were sitting in the front row, and they said, "You believe that?" I said, "Well, research don't lie." Today, if they source cattle, they go back to how the cow is managed because they know it affects sickness and they know it affects things like carcass traits. Which is more efficient? A calf that is from a cow that's supplemented or not? Turns out the non-supplemented is more efficient. There's a condition in humans that exists in ruminants called thrifty fetus. That calf is being developed in a nutrient restrictive environment. It's being programmed to say, hey, when I get out of here, I'm not going to have many nutrients, so I better be as efficient as possible. But it does not for the negative things I just told you about. So the consequences of nutrient restriction must be considered not only for the individual, but Junior here, who's not even born yet. And that's a May calving cow. And like I said, that is very deceiving in our later calving herds. So the stimuli experienced during fetal development impacting postnatal growth and physiology has been called fetal programming and developmental programming. We have the largest body of production relevant research of any place in the world that was generated north of here. We wrote a book on developmental programming in livestock. I don't know if some of you vets have seen this, but Bob Smith from Oklahoma called me one day and he says, Funston, it's time. He said, we know more about fetal programming in domestic animals in the last 3 to 15 years than we do in the last 50 years, but nobody's put it together. And this is currently not real current, but it's got a lot of the great information from the experts across the United States and world, from Australia to France. There's 12 chapters, I think we have one. What's the problem? Well, it's nutrient delivery, right? So it's insufficiency of nutrients impacting the programming of that animal that lasts a lifetime, and it is epigenetic. It is passed on. So this book, I probably sold a lot for this gal, but she's a medical journalist, went around documenting cases of women that were malnourished or overnourished during pregnancy, and documenting some of the cases of metabolic problems in the offspring later in life. One of the interesting chapters, though, I thought, was some rather short-lived acute things like 9/11, that the women that gave birth, after going through that event, gave birth to more girl babies. That there's a tribe of Aboriginals in Canada that don't have enough boys for a basketball team that live in the vicinity of several industrial sites. That harsh environment is being programmed to produce more females, get rid of the weak males. George Seidel was sitting right front in Roanoke, Virginia, and somebody asked me what the mechanism was. I said, that is the simplest question my limo driver can even tell you. And George said, didn't you learn anything when you were at Colorado State? Probably not that one. But he said, it's glucose. He said, that stressful event causes release of energy substrate, and it's deadly to the male embryo. I said, oh, who'd have thunk? We're going to hear some great work by Pedro Fontes during this program. I don't know if he's on today or tomorrow. We really lack the male side. What is it about these fat bulls? Why does Fred Smith tell me that when you're hauling a bull to McCook after bull sale, I gotta have him get 150 pounds off him before he'll produce semen? There is a male component too. This study was done in a significant laboratory animal like a mouse, but they made these males either obese or normal and mated them, and the obese animals produced offspring that had metabolic problems. This happened not during gestation. It affected the DNA before that animal ever fertilized. Okay, so we're done, basically. But mind all these things, it's not a silver bullet. There ain't a switch that turns reproduction on and off. It's got to be a culmination of a bunch of things that affect the brain, which starts with release of GnRH. So focus on the high percent pregnant early, starts with heifer development. Consider synchronizing, supplementing those high-risk animals. and segregating body condition, sound, herd, health, but man, we can overcome a lot with crossbreeding. Get your picture, Troy? So with that, from the heart of cattle country and the beef state, which it is, and the heart of the sandhills, John Young, who's now down in Texas, there's 896 heifers on the Rex Ranch. And Butch Schuler's son has done probably some very much more graphic things and has dubbed it what? Cow art? So I think we're running far enough behind, we probably won't have time for questions. But the website for this organization is beefrepro.org. And contain a lot of great information. The proceedings, which you did not get a proceedings, are going to be on that website.
Thank you, Rick.